Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Come on in. I'm Jamie Fraser Tracy. I'm the curator of collections here at the Historical Museum. We're so glad that you're here with us today. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker. Donna Rae Pearson is a radical historian with a master's degree in history with an emphasis in public history from WSU. Her research focuses on the history of African Americans in Kansas and historic preservation. She highly values participatory, history-based research projects that give underrepresented groups agency to tell their stories in the most accessible way possible. She has conducted and participated in numerous history, community engagement, and oral history projects. Many of these projects are through her consulting companies Kitchen Table History and The Other Road. During the past 30 years, her skills have helped her engage diverse communities in creating and preserving their local history. A self-described creative, nerdy, nature-loving Black woman in America, she thrives on spontaneous adventures. Currently, she is working for the Kansas Museum of History as a curator, where she helps acquire objects for the collection and was part of the team crafting a new Kansas history for the recently opened permanent gallery. She is a Wichita native, my dear friend. Please help me welcome Donna Rae Pearson.
That's it. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, let's try this one more time. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. I appreciate you coming out and spending some time with me this afternoon, especially considering the weather, especially considering it's a holiday weekend. It really means a lot to me that you made the time and the energy to come out. A little bit about the presentation. Well, let me get to this first. This presentation is actually pretty personal to me, not just because I study history or a historian. Kirk, hi. But because my family came to Wichita probably around the early 1940s, they were part of that great movement of Black families who came north looking for jobs, but also looking for dignity. Like so many others, they built their lives right here in this city. And I was born here in 1964. Yes, I am very proud of my age, and I will say it, okay? This really is not a distant story for me. This is not something I had to research and craft, but really I lived it, okay? So what I've learned, one of the things I've learned over time is history doesn't really fade away. Sometimes it gets paved over, or relocated, or renamed. And then we have to go back and discover it again. So when I say McAdams is not just a neighborhood, this is what I mean. It's a mirror. It's a mirror of resilience, displacement, self-determination, creativity, institutions that held us together when policy tried to break us apart. If you walk neighborhoods with the right eyes, if you walk in the neighborhood, you will see the story of Black Wichita. That story, you might see that story in your own family like I do, even if they came miles away. So it's not simply the past. Now, this doesn't normally happen this way, but I am going to ask a favor of you. During the Q&A, I want to hear from some of you. See, yeah, you already know what I'm going to do. I want to hear from some of you, your stories, your questions, the places you remember, and you want to see honored, because preserving history is not just a job for one person. It's a community decision. So, and I also want to drop this little tidbit to kind of frame this conversation. Have you heard of the Bible verse, Jeremiah 29:11? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say it for you. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Now, this was actually stated to me by a woman in Topeka named Mrs. Leal, and she was one of the early residents of Tennessee Town, which is a small Black community in Topeka. But I'd like to think that the same concept applies to Wichita. So thank you for being here. Let's start walking through this timeline together. And so let's get into it, okay? right. So when we talk about the beginnings of Black Wichita, we don't have to wait for the 20th century. We can start right at the foundation of the city. The very first known African American to step into what would become Wichita was a man named Buckner. Am I saying his first name right? I don't know. He actually arrived with the early settler James R. Meade in the 1860s. And he was a hunter, and I actually found him for the first time. Craig Minor found him first. Got to give Craig his due. But I found him right outside of Wichita and Towanda. And he worked with James Meade. Now, according to the 1923 Negro Yearbook, Negro women were actually the first to come here. I was like, I wonder what this debate is, but it tended to be in religious work, and it listed Mrs. Marion Miller, Mr. and Mrs. Wesley Hodge, and there was also a gentleman, John Ankles, or Artis, who arrived in 1870. He worked for the Munger family. Now, what this means is that the earliest days of Wichita settlements, a Black presence was already part of the story. And I think we tend to forget that part. We have been here, and we've always been here. Buckner was not recorded as a servant. He was listed as a member of the party. His presence signals that Black people were involved in exploration, labor, and decision-making in the birth of the city. Now, in 1870, Wichita was officially incorporated, and at that moment, when this city declared its existence, an African-American man named Richard Robinson signed the charter that made Wichita a city. Now, that means that a Black man legally helped create Wichita. That means Black civic participation wasn't just something that came later. It was present in the exact moment that the city became official. It's not something, the Black presence wasn't added. It's been foundational to the existence of this city. So yeah, let's pause on that. But before there were paved streets, before there were neighborhoods, before there was the name Wichita was widely known, Black individuals were here building, helping, witnessing the formation of the city. That sets a powerful tone for everything that follows. Black civic identity in Wichita began not just as a protest, but as participation. From the start, African Americans were involved in shaping the city's political and physical landscape. As the settlement grew into a town, more Black men and women arrived: laborers, laundresses, cooks, builders, cowboys, and entrepreneurs. As we know, they weren't always written into the history books, but they were here, blending the frontier's survival with ambition. And Wichita was still a rough, uncertain place with dirt roads, trading camps, and saloons, but the earliest residents saw a possibility. That early presence matters to tell us something important, that Black life in the city was not a later chapter, but the beginning. Now, this is going to be somewhat controversial, so y'all can get at me in the Q&A after I say this, but I don't count the exodusters as having a huge impact. I saw the looks. I don't count the exodusters as having a huge impact on Wichita's early settlement. The exoduster period happened between 1879 and 1881. Okay, and in 1878, the local census said that 43 Black men, 42 women, and 23 boys and 18 girls, roughly 2% of the population was here. During the Exodus period, like I said, 1879 to 1881, the Black population only grew by 14 families. When you consider the rest of the state, how many thousands poured into the state, that means we weren't necessarily, and in fact, Marshall Murdoch kicked them out. They came down, they were sent here from Topeka by train. There was a scare about diseases going on, so after they got off the train, they hunted them down and put them back on the train. that's a pretty clear sign that they weren't necessarily wanted here. But the black population did have a slow but steady climb. By 1880, blacks comprised about 3.5% of the Wichita's residents, growing to about 5% by 1890, a figure large enough to be considered a political force. And once those early pioneers put down roots, the next step was clear. Create institutions that would carry the community forward. Let's explore the foundations of some of those early churches and community organizations. As black families set roots down in Wichita, they knew they had to rely on themselves and each other. One of the first priorities was to establish strong community institutions, especially churches. In the 1870s, only a few years after the city's founding, African Americans in Wichita started gathering prayer meetings in private homes. From one house group sprang Wichita's two oldest black churches. By 1878, just 8 years after incorporation, black Wichitas had found St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church, and they had also founded Calvary Baptist Church. Now think about that. In less than a decade of being here, they built not one, but two enduring congregations. And what I mean by that is those congregations are still here today. So we're over 150 years of those congregations. Calvary Baptist grew rapidly. By the 1920s, it had about 500 members, making it a major pillar in Black Wichita. Why were churches so important? Because in an era of rising segregation, Black churches were more than just a place to worship. They were community centers, schools, and meeting halls all in one. These institutions gave African Americans a safe space to organize, educate children, and support one another at a time when white society was beginning to exclude them. The churches nurtured local leadership and self-governance. For example, early prayer meetings were led by community members like Mrs. Robinson, the one whose husband signed the Constitution, the document, the charter, showing Black women as well as men were active roles in organizing. Churches weren't the only backbone. Black Wichita also saw early education and media initiatives. The first Black teachers in schools appeared in these early decades, though schooling remained segregated for a long time. And in 1908, a Black publisher named Holly T. Sims founded the Wichita Negro Star, a weekly Black newspaper that ran for decades. All these institutions, the churches, the papers, social clubs, and fraternal lodges created a supportive parallel society that were institutional backbones. So let's look at education for a second. Let me take you back to the beginning of public schooling in Wichita. And before we talk about segregation, it's important to know this. Black children were part of Wichita's first classrooms, not later, but from the beginning. The first known Black family in Wichita, Richard and Sarah Robinson, arrived in, like I said, 1869 or 1870. Their sons, George Walter and also Samuel W. Jones, were likely the very first children to attend the first public school at 2nd and Emporia, built in 1871. And what's powerful is this. The early school records from 1873 already show Black and white children learning together. The record lists 16 Black boys and 8 Black girls among the 425 white students attending Wichita schools. That means in 1873, Wichita was still a frontier city, but education was more integrated than it would be decades later. 1 year after that, Kansas passed the Civil Rights Act of 1874, which explicitly stated no student could be excluded from public schools because of race. And at that moment, Wichita looked more inclusive than many cities in the North and South. But as we often see in history, inclusion invites anxiety sometimes. By 1879, we started to see a shift. And that's also when the exodusters started pouring in the state. It's kind of the philosophy just one too many causes a stir, right? So the city discussed creating a suitable location for colored children, a phrase that reveals how quickly the idea of separation was developing. And in 1881, there was a legal challenge as the Kansas Supreme Court ruled that Wichita as a city of the second class, because if you could only segregate if you were a city of the first class, which means you had to have at least 15,000 people. That slowed segregation, but it did not end the idea. So what we see in Wichita is a pattern. At first, Black children were integrated, not because of goodwill, but because they were too few to segregate. As the Black community grew, pressure rose to separate them. Education became the first battleground over belonging in Wichita. As classrooms began to define belonging, another part of the community life began to grow, fraternal groups and institutions that built the backbone of Black Wichita. So, these networks provide social activities, leadership training, and to help improve political and economic conditions. Collectively, they can combat societal problems. These groups provide essential social support, leadership training, and mutual aid. The Arkansas Valley Lodge number 21, Prince Hall Masons, was organized in 1885. Members included nearly all professional and middle-class black men in Wichita in 1910. The Masons began construction on their building at 615 Main, a building that other Black organizations utilized as well. The Water Street branch of the YMCA was organized for colored men and boys in 1908 and provided gym classes and athletic teams and training. There was also a YWCA, the Alice Talbert one, that was located in the Water and Main area. The women were part of the community networks being built. And they started institutionalizing welfare and mutual aid. African American women's clubs and organizations formed a social safety net for the community, ensuring vulnerable people received care in the neighborhood. One of their most pioneering efforts was the earliest formation of the Phyllis Wheatley Children's Home, which began around 1907, when Mrs. Clark of Wichita opened her residence at 626 North Water to care for children, initially calling it the Phyllis Wheatley Home for Negro Orphans. She sustained this effort through private donations. The most significant contribution was led by the Federation of Wichita Colored Women, which realized the dire need for a stable institution for youth. They led the campaign to give Phyllis Wheatley Children's Home a solid foundation after 1915. The purpose of the home was explicitly to shelter and protect homeless children. This institution, which provided a haven and cultural programs for hundreds of underprivileged youth, became a powerful symbol of strength of the African American community. Key figures were Mrs. F.O. Miller, president of the board of directors, who dedicated 41 years of service to the home, steering it through challenges and expansion efforts. When the home closed in 1980, it was located at 9th and Mathewson. So, yes. All right. In the late 1800s to the early 1900s, Wichita's Black residents carved out what we consider a vibrant commercial hub of their own. Kind of, you've heard of the Black Wall Street? We had it at least times 2 or 3, really, when you think about it. But this was the first one. It was a vibrant commercial hub centered around Water Street and North Main Street downtown. Well, why there? Following the collapse of the real estate boom in the late 1880s, commercial buildings were vacated on Main Street, allowing Black entrepreneurs to acquire space and open businesses serving the residential district. Because of the prevailing segregation, the Black community created a cohesive community in the Water and Main area. Because of segregation and white prejudice left them little choice, the response Black entrepreneurs was created a self-sufficient business district to serve the community's needs. This area near Water and Main became the indispensable hub of Black life through the first half of the 20th century. The other day when I was in town, still working on this, but it's fine, I went down to Water and Main. And I really tried to visualize what nearly 100 Black businesses, organizations, all in buildings would have looked like over like a 4 or 5 block area. I mean, you really have to use your historical imagination considering what it looks like today. But if you go to 615 Main and see the Ark Valley Lodge building and kind of duplicate that in your brain by about 100, I think you get a sense of the cohesiveness and the closeness of this community. This is what was economic self-determination in action. The opportunity wasn't given to them. They created their own. By the 1920s, in fact, Wichita mirrored a trend seen across the country. There is a golden age of Black business formation. Wichita's Black population was small. At this time, around 1920, it was only about 3,500, but they produced an impressive array of enterprises. For example, a Black real estate investor and pastor, Reverend J.H. Van Loo, became one of the city's largest landowners. Van Loo used his wealth to establish a department store on North Main Street and an office building that housed Black businesses like Jackson Mortuary, which too is over 100 years old. Imagine the statement that made in the 1900s, a Black-owned department store right on Main Street. It's a bold claim of economic rights and spatial belonging in Wichita's downtown. Many others thrived too. The Wichita Negro Yearbook of 1922 and 23 listed 100, like I said, 100 Black-owned services from tailors like Sexton Tailoring to restaurants. Entrepreneurial Black women made their mark as well. A little bit later, Victoria Hightower founded Citizens Funeral Home, and her daughter Xavier Howard became the first Black woman in Kansas licensed as a funeral director and an embalmer in 1942. These businesses weren't just about profit, they met vital community needs with dignity at a time when Black families couldn't even count on respectful treatment from white funeral parlors or stores. However, even as Black businesses flourished in their niche, they did face hard limits. Wichita's overall Black community, like I said, was relatively small, only about 3,500, limiting the customer base. When beyond economics, the wider segregationist policies loomed. By the 1920s and the 1930s, Jim Crow norms were tightening their grip, and racism, sometimes spent violent, reminded Black people, Black entrepreneurs, that their successes had limits. Black-owned shops downtown sometimes endured harassment. Their very existence of a prosperous Black economy challenged the prevailing societal order. Ultimately, no matter how hard they worked or how many businesses they built, they could not easily expand beyond the confines of segregation. As the decades went on, these pressures would force major geographical shift for the community. By the 1940s, it became clear that the Black business district and the residential areas downtown were hemmed in. Next, we'll see how federal policies, especially redlining, and local segregation combined to push Black Wichitans out of the city center and into a new neighborhood in the Northeast. But first, I want to talk about McAdams, the park itself. Now, McKinley Park, as some of you may or may not know, is the original name of the park, began in 1901, and it's named for, actually, President McKinley, but it sat untouched for almost 20 years. The park was created during a land boom to serve Wichita's, quote, North Enders, who hoped to shift Wichita's center of gravity north. There was Griffinstein and some other one, Murdoch, had a fight downtown, and they tried to claim space. Griffinstein lost. That's how that happened. But history is full of unexpected turns. By 1911, Black families began using McKinley Park for picnics, tent gatherings, 4th of July celebration, and church events, not as the colored park, but simply because it was the only open space available to them. As one newspaper noted, the park is filled with Japanese lanterns, barbecues, and open-air concerts. When Black residents requested lighting and police protection in the 1920s, they never requested segregation, but the city began tagging it as a colored park during that time in official writings. That's how Jim Crow often arrived, not all at once, but word by word and policy by policy. Yet the community did not retreat. They took ownership of it. They held events, built institutions, honored veterans, and successfully pushed for a 9-hole golf course when all others refused Black players. This wasn't just recreation, it was a declaration of existence. And then came the defining figure, Emerson McAdams, who lived nearby and worked for the park for 26 years as the park director. The park eventually took his name, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. What began as a failed real estate project became a community landmark built, shaped, and defended by Black citizens. But you know, government's always got to come in there somewhere, right? Does anyone know what this map is? I'm like, y'all forgot that whole I need to hear you thing. What is it? It's a redlining map. That's right. Thank you. Before we delve into McAdams as a neighborhood, let's look closely at what pushed the community there. It is a practice called redlining. This infamous practice was a product of the 1930s. The federal agents of the Homeowners Loan Corporation drew color-coded maps of the cities to guide mortgage lending. Neighborhoods were graded A for green, which is the best, or go. B is blue, or desirable. Yellow is like, we're declining. And D, red, is hazardous. Yeah, exactly. And the chief criterion, especially here in Wichita, well, actually, I don't want to say especially here in Wichita because I have done this research in Topeka, and research in Topeka is very blatant. If you're Black or brown, it's red, period. That's all they put in the descriptions. Topeka, Wichita actually tried to do it a little bit more justly, but in the end, it was race. If a neighborhood had Black residents or was even threatened by Black or immigrant influx, it was usually stamped in red. It's kind of hard to see because it's big up here, but we're going to talk about it a little bit. This wasn't subtle. The survey forms literally asked any threat of infiltration of foreign-born Negro or lower-grade population. A yes meant the area's creditworthiness was doomed. The Wichita's HOLC map of 1937 is striking. 64% of the city neighbors, 64% of the neighborhoods were redlined, one of the highest proportions in the nation. In the map on the slide, you can see that the red shaded blocks cover the city's core. No, this isn't. Right there? All right. I think. There it is. No, I gotta hold it. There we go. So this is, if I'm in the right place, this is actually yellow where they were, and they end up moving over into this area by 1937. And as we can see, that entire area is red. And can you imagine an entire city where 64% of it cannot get a loan? They can't get a loan to either buy a house or renovate their houses. And that's why, just much like any other city that had a major proportion redline, you'll find the development starts happening on the outer ends of the city. I mean, when you look at this part of the city that's relatively new, it's green. There's only one section for white. I mean, it's kind of weird when you think about it. It's only one section that white people could feel like they could live in because there are no black people. It's interesting. The big red area D2 in the center corresponds, which, like I said, D2, I can't find it. It is right in there, I believe. Which Wichita's primary black neighborhood of the era, which is the old Wichita, the Water and Main area, essentially the only place black families could live. The assessors made no secrets of the area in their notes. They literally said, you know, the heavy Negro population of the Wichita and rated its desirability as low as it can be, quote. It meant insurance business loans were hard to come by in black areas. Even decades later, long after redlining was outlawed in 1968, the effects still linger. For instance, to this day, the historically redlined community is the zip code 67214. So if you've ever heard reference to 67214 and it being a black community, that is part of it. It also has one of the lowest home ownership rates in the city and the lasting legacy of those denied loans. It's important to grasp this before we talk about McAdams, because McAdams exists where it does largely because of redlining and segregation policy. And we're going to look at one more policy that does, most people don't think about city planning. Right? I'm actually a city planner. I'm on the planning commission, where I get to decide every other day who gets to be your neighbor in Topeka. There's a lot of people that don't like me, but it's fine. It's fine. This also happened in Wichita. By the 1940s, the black neighborhood in the Northeast was growing fast. Redlining maps had effectively said, stay in this red zone, and local authorities did little to improve the conditions. In fact, they later labeled it blighted, using the substandard conditions as justification for further interventions. Overcrowding became a big problem in the late 1940s. Wichita had a severe post-World War II housing shortage citywide, but if you were black, it was even worse. You couldn't simply rent or buy in many parts of town. So the black population had to squeeze into aging housing in the Northeast District. A city report in the 1940s noted that some of the parts of what's now McAdams did not have basic services such as paved roads, running water, sewers, because the city had long neglected to invest there. This was the classic vicious cycle of segregation. Deny services, then call the area a slum because it's run down. But when we look at these maps, and unfortunately, it's kind of high up, but what this map is, these maps are from a city plan, and it's a gentleman named Harlan Bartholomew who worked all across the state of Kansas. And I think understanding his pattern of behavior, he was really good at identifying areas that he considered slum, and that he would tell city officials, if we could get this area up and going, you can raise more taxes, right? So you can't get a lot of money from a blighted house, but if you put a brand new shiny building there, you can raise taxes. So these are some of the plans from there during that time period. On paper, these homes were reduced to black ink boxes waiting to be replaced by curving rows or improved housing corridors. But what do we see next? McAdams, like many black communities nationwide, they didn't disappear. New institutions were formed, churches consolidated, youth sports emerged. McAdams Park became not just a park, but a center of gravity. The more the city tried to reshape the neighborhood, the more the neighborhood reshaped its own identity. Planning documents tell us one story of blight, but we can also look at the actual neighborhood and understand it's a story of survival as well. So, because of these external forces of redlining and city planning, McAdams neighborhood was born. In the 1940s, the neighborhood north of Murdoch and east of Washington began filling up with black residents. Back then, it was often just called the North End, or sometimes the Dunbar District after a school there. Not quite yet McAdams. This area had been a mixed race working class district, but by the mid 20th century, it became overwhelmingly African American as black families left other parts of town. Vacant lots built up, old houses were subdivided into apartments to accommodate the influx. By the 1950s, the McAdams area was undeniably the hub of Black Wichita. One study noted that many of the small homes built in the 20s around the Dunbar Elementary School, which is located at 9th and Cleveland, were occupied by black families. And those who could afford it built new homes on remaining lots. The tight-knit neighborhood emerged, anchored by a few key institutions. As I said, one of those is McKinley Park, a public park at 13th and Ohio. This park would later be renamed McAdams, as I said, for Emerson McAdams. And who was he? He was a beloved black community leader who worked as the park supervisor. Mr. Mack, or Mac, as I understand that he was called by some people, ran the recreation programs and mentored kids for decades. Renaming the park after him following his death in 1965, he had a sudden heart attack. A form of identity reclamation, putting a black leader's name on a public space in a city that had so often disregarded black contributions. Eventually, the entire surrounding neighborhood took on the name of McAdams. It's a beautiful example of how the community claimed its own narrative. A once redlined area now bearing the name of one of its own heroes. Life in the burgeoning McAdams neighborhood was full of challenges. It could have been overcrowding, there's lower quality housing, but it also had vitality. Unlike dispersed pockets of downtown where black businesses and families were geographically concentrated, which created a sense of solidarity and bustling street life. One remarkable fact is that this neighborhood that I discovered, I just thought it was interesting. There were more churches per square mile than anywhere else in Wichita. And I actually drove the neighborhood the other day, and literally on every single street you could find a church. I couldn't identify all of them, but I thought that was very interesting. I think architecturally, because I'm a historic preservationist, I pay attention to this. New Hope is my favorite structure. So go find New Hope Baptist Church in the McAdams neighborhood when you're done. You're like, not New Hope? You don't think it's New Hope? The original, right. Yeah. Oh, yeah, is that what that other one is? I was like, what is this building? It doesn't have a name on it. Anyway, we're digressing. You wait, and I'll get back to you, okay? These congregations not only provided spiritual support, they hosted Boy Scout troops, choir performances, fish fry fundraisers, and brought neighbors together. Churches, a park, schools, homes. McAdams had the core of a self-contained community. Now, the community had rooted itself in McAdams. It didn't just survive, it thrived on its own terms. So, yes, I'm actually going to skip that. Yeah, so by the late 1950s, McAdams was alive with black-owned businesses as well and cultural institutions. The focal point was around 9th Street and Cleveland Avenue, which became the new commercial district once black entrepreneurs relocated out of downtown. If you strolled that intersection, you could find a bustling scene. There was the Dunbar Theater right there, which opened in 1941. It was a black-owned movie theater named for poet Lawrence Dunbar. The Dunbar wasn't just a place to watch movies, it was also a community gathering spot where kids and adults alike made memories. There were barbershops, beauty salons, a pharmacy, all the essentials of everyday life, owned and operated by black Wichitans for black Wichitans. They call it FUBU, for us, by us. One city report notes that the 9th and Cleveland area, many of these buildings were constructed specifically or for Black-owned businesses. In other words, Black architects and builders literally built bricks and mortar landscape of McAdams Main Strip. One of the institutions we can highlight that I forgot to put on this slide, but it's fine, is the Phyllis Wheatley home. Remember I mentioned that it was also downtown? Well, it made the move to the new neighborhood as well. The YMCA and the YWCA also made it over to the Cleveland Street area. The Y became a crucial spot for youth sports and community programs. There was a library branch there, and I understand that there was also a library branch within the McAdams Park Center as well. So I thought that was interesting. There was the neighborhood park hosted everything from softball leagues and the annual Juneteenth picnic. There was even a Black tennis club formed, as was the Black golf club. Yeah, y'all got it, okay. This all paints a picture of a vibrant, self-reliant community. Yes, it was born from segregation, but residents took what was forced isolation and turned it into a wellspring of creativity and solidarity. If you needed a job, you might find one with a Black-owned business around the corner. But within the confines set by segregation, McAdams fostered a remarkably rich community life. Many residents felt a strong sense of ownership and pride in their neighborhood. It was theirs in a way that no other part of Wichita could be at the time. But soon, civil rights actions reverberated beyond the neighborhood. In the late 1950s and 60s, McAdams' young people and community leaders led the charge for change in Wichita, from integrating drugstore lunch counters to pushing for fair housing. Let's look at one of those pivotal moments, which is the Dockham Drugstore sit-in of 1958. And the youth who participated in that sit-in were from the McAdams neighborhood. The civil rights movement in Wichita's Black community was actually on the front lines earlier than most. And one example is the Dockham Drugstore sit-in of 1958. This took place at Dockham Drugstore in downtown Wichita. It was kind of up the street and around the corner from here. Oh, that way, sorry. A popular soda fountain that refused to serve Black customers at the lunch counter. In July of 1958, a group of Black teenagers and college students, many of them from the McAdams neighborhood, or who had spent their formative years in schools and churches, decided enough is enough. Under the quiet organization of the local NAACP Youth Council, they launched a sit-in. Day after day, these young African Americans, including names like Galen Vesey and sisters Joyce and Laquita Glass, sat down at Dockham's drug counter and simply refused to leave until they were served. They didn't shout or carry signs, they just sat and inevitably denied service. They stayed put, they did homework, they chatted for hours. And if one group got tired, another group was rotated in. This went on for 3 weeks in the heat of summer in 1958. Imagine the courage that it took. These were young teenagers young and old, facing angry stares and sometimes threats from white patrons and staff every day. Then suddenly it worked. Literally, suddenly it worked. On July 19, 1958, the manager, reportedly fed up with losing business, relented and told staff, "Serve them, I'm losing money." It came down to capitalism, but we'll take it, right?
Where exactly, for those of us who are not from Wichita,
Okay.
where exactly is that is that the building that?
It's still the Ambassador Hotel.
Thank you. I thought so, though. I wasn't sure.
Where are you from? Where are you from?
Excuse me?
Where are you from?
Oh, Wichita.
Okay.
Lawrence, I had some knowledge as far as Kansas.
Okay. All right. I will continue.
I always wanted to
Shortly after the Dockham sit-in forced the entire Rexall drugstore chain to desegregate all its lunch counters nationwide. This was one of the first successful student-led lunch counter sit-ins in the country, predating the Greensboro sit-ins by almost 2 years. So let that sink in for a second. Wichita's Black youngsters, many products of the community forged in McAdams neighborhood, staged a groundbreaking, nonviolent protest that won a victory before the rest of the nation caught on. The Dockham sit-in victory was a huge morale boost. It affirmed that the resilience learned in McAdams, that sense of self-worth and organization, could change a whole city. After Dockham, Wichita quietly desegregated many restaurants and theaters before the 1965 Civil Rights Act. Black Wichitans pressed for other rights during this time period too. They campaigned for fair housing laws, equal employment opportunities, and desegregation of Wichita's public schools. But there's a whole nother story that I'm not going to get into right now. The community's institutional backbones, like churches and the NAACP, provided the structure, but it was the people, often the youth, empowered by their community values, who carried the movement forward. The late 1960s saw successes like the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968, which finally outlawed housing discrimination, though enforcement was another matter. Wichita's activists had pushed local officials to advance integration even before that law. For example, the Fair Housing Ordinance in the city came around that time. Figures like Chester I. Lewis, the local NAACP president, and the attorney whose office was in the northeast side were instrumental. The city has named a downtown park after Chester Lewis. All of this underscores Black Wichita, though smaller than communities like Kansas City or elsewhere, they punched above its weight in the civil rights, much of that incubated in places like McAdams. However, even as progress was being made in civil rights, a new threat emerged to the McAdams neighborhood itself. Modern urban development in the form of a highway construction and urban renewal struck the heart of McAdams neighborhoods in the 1960s. Our next slide will look at that. The late 60s brought a painful chapter of McAdams called urban renewal. Across the nation, urban renewal often meant wiping out minority neighborhoods to make way for highways or redevelopment, and Wichita was no exception. The most jarring impact was the construction of Interstate 35. If you look at a map today, and you can kind of see it on this map, this is the best example I could find. This is McKinley Park right here, and this is where they are planning to put the highway. And it's hard to tell, but this is actually overlapping the park itself. So they're planning, it didn't matter that this park had been here for almost 100 years. They were going to put a highway through it. And then this area, which McAdams neighborhood kind of grew into this area as well, this is where Industrial Park was going to be. So the citizens leaders literally routed it straight through the area they had determined was blighted. Remember a couple pages ago I said they decided to redline it, then blight it. That gave them permission to put a highway there because they were just improving the area, right? By 1971, the highway was built and physically fragmented McAdams, isolating a portion of it on the other side of the interstate and destroying dozens of homes. And in fact, I lived in one of those homes, and my mother and my father lived near where KU Med is right now. Their house was taken and we had to move to another area when I was a child, about 5 years old, I think it was. They lost the golf course in '71 that they had fought so long for. But it symbolized how Black amenities were often sacrificed for progress. Urban renewal efforts also targeted parts of downtown Wichita where Black institutions stood. For example, in the 1960s, a redevelopment plan threatened Calvary Baptist Church. By then, it was over 50 years old and still located where it's at right now with demolition. The congregation actually did relocate, and the historic building was nearly lost, but through efforts of the community, it was saved. It was put on the National Register, and that's where the Kansas African American Museum is today. So if you haven't visited there, I bet they're open today. She's like, I don't know, okay. Likewise, some Black-owned businesses near the downtown core were displaced by redevelopment projects for civic buildings and parking lots. Essentially, just as the community had solidified its footing in McAdams, another wave of displacement hit, echoing the earlier exodus from downtown. Only this time, it was justified under technical terms like highway construction, slum clearance, rather than overt racism, but the outcome really felt the same. The psychological impact was as real as the physical one was. Urban renewal was supposed to improve blighted neighborhoods, but in McAdams, it largely served to break up a thriving Black business district, and the city planners perhaps didn't value. Yet through it all, McAdams endured. The community's core identity was not erased by the highway. If anything, those who stayed doubled down on preserving what McAdams meant. So the community still exists, and is still there today. Now, technically, Piatt Street is in McAdams and going through McAdams. I do want to talk about, because this is not talked about enough in public spaces, so if you haven't heard of this, don't feel bad, because again, we don't talk about it enough. This event was one of the greatest tragedies Wichita ever experienced, and yet for years, it was scarcely spoken about. On January 16, 1965, a U.S. Air Force KC-135 tanker malfunctioned after takeoff and crashed directly into the McAdams neighborhood. It killed 30 people, many of them children, and injured dozens more. Almost all were African American. Despite the magnitude of the tragedy, there's no major national recognition, but through the efforts of Aletha Faust Godot, she got a memorial put into the Piatt Street Park. What happened after the crash was the community itself organized relief. Churches housed families, food was shared, burials were arranged. McAdams once again took care of its own, but the city did not immediately act. There was no memorial, no investigation with community participation, and there was very little compensation. For many residents, this was the moment the neighborhood began asking the deeper question. If tragedy happens here, does the city hear it? For nearly 50 years, the crash lived mostly through oral memory, through family stories, church testimonies, and quiet recollection. But the neighborhood did not forget, and eventually that persistence led to something important, the Piatt Memorial Park. After years of advocacy, the city finally set aside ground to recognize the crash site, and the historical marker now stands to honor those who were lost. What began as a community grief became community insistence on visibility. The park is small, but it's symbolic. It's powerful. If you haven't visited, I again encourage you to go visit it. It proves that even institutions failed to remember, and people of McAdams did not forget. That's what resilience looks like. When memory is not given, the neighborhood built it anyway. So, in conclusion, the journey of early Black Wichita culminating in the McAdams neighborhood shows us a powerful truth. A community's strength isn't measured by obstacles it faces, but by how it responds to them. McAdams, as we've seen, was forged by adversity, slavery's aftermath, poverty, Jim Crow segregation, redlining, and urban renewal all played a role in this story, but none of those forces were able to crush the spirit of the people. In fact, Wichitans responded with resilience, finding ways to thrive even when fenced in. With community building, such as founding churches, businesses, newspapers, clubs, and economic self-determination, creating jobs and services for themselves, and with institutional backbones such as the AME Church and the NAACP Youth Council in 1958, and when given the chance, they practice identity reclamation, taking charge of their own story and how it is told and remembered, whether by naming a park, McAdams, or turning an old church into a statewide African American museum. Thank you for listening and taking this journey with me. I hope you learned something today, and I would be happy to take any questions.